Welcome to the Changing Earth podcast with Sarah F. Hathaway, blending survival, fiction, and fact to bring you entertaining education that'll help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sarah F. Hathaway.
Hello, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of the Changing Earth podcast. Since I'm so far ahead on my podcast, and I didn't want to just go back and regurgitate the same information, I'm going to do it a little bit special for my YouTube viewers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a video of each chapter being read to you. Then you will find a supplemental video to the chapter, which contains information that you can use and apply in your daily life to get you more prepared for disaster scenarios. You'll find these videos listed as Season 1, Episode 1B, for example, or supplemental video. So go ahead and look for those after you hear the story from the chapter. We're going to start out reading Day After Disaster, which is my very first book in the Changing Earth series. The version that I'm presenting to you today is kind of a middle-of-the-road version. So what happened was when I first published Day After Disaster, I published it with a Christian publishing company. And they made me remove all of the cuss words from the book. But they did not make me remove the couple of sex scenes that are actually in the book. I had a lot of teenage readers that wanted to read Day After Disaster. So I went ahead and did a young adult edition of Day After Disaster, which removed all of the sexual content. So if you look on Amazon, you'll find Day After Disaster, the young adult edition. However, my publishing company has since gone out of business. So going off on the road that I was on, I was free to take that book, self-publish it myself. And when I did that, I took it back to the original form with all of the naughty words in it and all of the good content in it. And that is now listed as Day After Disaster, the uncut edition. So you can find both of those on Amazon. You'll only find this middle-of-the-road version in audiobook form, but the uncut edition is available on Amazon if you'd like to pick that up. So I don't want to keep you waiting. Let's go ahead and get into Chapter 1 of Day After Disaster. Day After Disaster by Sarah F. Hathaway. Dedication. For Cynthia, may happiness shine upon you like your endless love and support has always shined upon me. For TR, may your passions always guide you like the fire you have lit in my heart. Chapter 1. Erica woke up in a panic to the smell of must and wine. She was frantic and could not move. Where was she, and why did an immense pain overwhelm her? She tried to calm herself and let her tears rinse the stinging out of her eyes so she could focus, but there was darkness all around her. As her pupils began to widen, adjusting to a dark room, she realized her body was buried from her neck down under some immovable mass. Her mind started racing. She remembered going to work that day just the same way she had done so many times before. She worked in a small restaurant in the Sacramento Valley. It was called El Primero. This high-class Mexican restaurant was located in a beautifully remodeled Victorian home. The home had been built in the 1800s and had always been perfectly maintained by its owners. 4 years ago, an ambitious entrepreneur had bought the home to turn it into a restaurant that would bring Mexican food into the fine dining spotlight. True to its purpose, the chefs produced gourmet Mexican delicacies on a nightly basis in one of the finest kitchens in town. The restaurant was only a recent phase for the home, though. Its main purpose had been a residence for multiple families. Sometime during the Cold War, a paranoid homeowner had built a bomb shelter underneath the area that became the restaurant's kitchen. The bomb shelter itself had remained virtually unchanged after its installation, and rather than sealing it shut, the restaurant owner decided to make use of it instead. It made an excellent storage area for just about any supplies the restaurant needed to operate efficiently, and it wasn't long until the employees started utilizing it as a break room as well. The only way into the bomb shelter was through a heavy door that sealed tight when shut. The stairs descended downwards, and the walls were lined with cabinet space. The wooden cabinets stored everything from dry foods to napkins to cleaners. At the end of the stairs, the room opened up into an area that was originally meant to be living quarters for nuclear bomb survivors. Since then, it had been strategically stacked with plastic water jugs for the water coolers and shelves for more storage. There was also a table with a few chairs around it for working and taking a break, and a huge oak wine rack that contained the expensive wines that the restaurant boasted, which were especially chosen to accompany the Mexican dishes. Erica had run down to grab a new bottle of Merlot. She hated going down into that dark dungeon. The door would slam behind her with a bang that would make her jump. She had no choice, though. A disagreeable customer had insisted he would only drink their very finest bottle of Merlot, and the waitress had asked her to grab it for her since she had another order up. Erica had seen the bottle on the shelf, but as she grabbed for the bottle, a severe shaking began. California always shook from time to time. In this area of the world, the Earth's plates shifted regularly enough for the inhabitants to become accustomed to the nauseating shaking, but this time was different. The Earth, rotating on its course outlined in the depths of space, is a precious miracle of life. It has been a bountiful provider for its inhabitants for generations and generations of countless species. But these new inhabitants, the humans, they developed as no animal had before. They have an insatiable urge to grow, to expand, and to change the natural process that had sustained life for so long, and it was killing the great Mother Earth. The humans had finally gone too far. Not only had they cut, carved, and dug at the delicate skin in ways that had opened huge gaping wounds in the surface, they had trampled the natural environment and destroyed all other animal species with little regard for any life but their own. They built everywhere. The Earth's own materials had been stripped from her, manipulated, and then stacked on her fragile surface like huge warts glowing and gleaming in the night. The Mother Earth had taken enough abuse. She began to shake like a dog trying to expel fleas that had been biting at it and scratching at it for too long. Erica, unaware of the extent of the Earth's fury, had been too close to the wine racks when the rumble began. She bent her legs to maintain her balance, but the wine rack began to rock back and forth. Before she could dodge it, the large oak rack teetered its last totter and fell smack on top of Erica. The incredible weight of the wood held her to the floor, and the scattered shards of glass from the broken wine bottles made her very apprehensive about her situation. She felt a stinging pain in her left arm and leg, but between the darkness of the bomb shelter and the moisture of the wine puddle she was lying in, she didn't know how badly she was hurt. She tried to force the wine rack off her as hard as she could. When she realized she was not going to be able to lift this rack on her own, panic overtook her again. She began to produce a sound as loud as her vocal cords could muster. She shouted and wailed, but her desperate pleas went unheard. Finally, exhausted, her crying ceased. Her throat was too sore to continue. She stared up through the darkness at the heavily sealed door and realized that no one could hear her, no matter how loud she yelled. It was useless. If no one can hear me, I'll have to wait for someone to find me. They'll probably notice I'm missing in no time. Erica's worn-out vocal cords scratched as she spoke. While she waited for help, the pain began to eat into every fiber of her being. She had to think about something else, but her mind was in a panic. The dark and quiet made it even harder to block out the pain, so she began to talk to herself. I wonder why no one has come to look for me. They must know I'm missing. That guy is probably grumbling more about his wine. I wonder what time it is. I wonder if Vince had made it home from work with Dexter before the quake hit. I wish I could call him. Her cell phone was in her green bag that she carried to keep her personal belongings in. It was stacked right over there on a shelf with the other employees' purses and backpacks. She looked towards it through the blackness, wishing she could reach it and call the man she loved so much. She knew he would always be there to help her, and she desperately wished he was there now to help lift the load that seemed to be crushing her into a pancake on the freezing cold cement floor. Pain, shock, and fatigue finally took their toll on the pinned woman, and she fell into a daze filled with dreams. She dreamed of her husband, Vince, with his brown curly hair and matching beard, his eyes that could see into her very soul, and his tall, lean body that was perfectly accentuated by his little round belly. He had a great smile, and he was never afraid to announce the sheer joy of being married to her brought him. She dreamed of her son, Dexter. He was already 5 years old, but it seemed like just yesterday that Erica had given birth to him. Erica had a fairly easy pregnancy, and on the day that she did finally hold him in her arms, she embraced a baby for the very first time in her life. At that moment, she learned that there was a type of love that was so unbreakable and remarkable that it made her breathless even in her dreams. She had watched her precious baby grow into a little boy. His blonde hair formed a perfect outline around his fine-looking facial features. His eyes were a steely gray, and they seemed to hold an ancient wisdom within them. Erica's dreams were shattered when she awoke to another rumble that made the heavy oak rack grind into every bone of her body. Her pain was searing. She felt like the herbs between a mortar and pestle, but these herbs were being marinated in Sauvignon Blanc and white Zinfandel. What the hell is going on? They have to be looking for me now. How long have I been here? Where is everyone? Gosh darn it, someone help me. What if no one knows I'm still down here? Well, I've got to get out of here. My leg is throbbing and my arm is too, for that matter. What if I'm really hurt and I've been trapped here for God knows how long? She finished speaking in a frantic tantrum of frustration. The rant of emotion seemed to give her a new strength. With a sudden flash of fierce determination, she decided she would have to free herself. She had to lift this thing off her, but she could just barely recoil her arms enough to give a desperate heave on the rack. With all her effort, she lifted the heavy rack a tiny bit, but that was all she could do. It was so heavy, she had to quickly let it go, and it fell back on her bruised body again. What am I going to do? This thing weighs a ton. I have to get out. Erica's mind reeled. Logic was unreachable, but the instinctive survival side of her took over. Her eyes had adjusted as much as they could to the darkness of the shelter. She swiveled her head around, and in the shadows she thought she could see a milk crate that had been used to transport the wine to the rack. It didn't look too far out of reach. If she could just free her right hand, maybe she could reach it. She heaved up on the oak rack again. This time, she only tried to move it enough to move her arm. She found that the little bit she could push it up was enough to squeeze her hand up toward her head until she had it extended out above her. She couldn't hold the rack up for long, though. When she dropped the rack back down on her, there was only one arm to support the weight of the oak, and it fell hard onto her ribs. She exhaled as the wind was ripped out of her lungs. After she caught her breath, she knew that she had to free herself as quickly as she could. She needed to find out if she was seriously hurt, because at that moment, she felt like every bone in her body was broken. She reached out for the crate. She knew that it was essential to get a good grip on it. Any attempt to just touch the crate might push it farther away and diminish the possibility of escape from her wine rack cage. All in one movement, she thrust the rack up and grabbed the crate. Her fingers slid through the square holes in the milk crate and she pulled it closer. The next step would be the most critical part of her escape. She gathered her strength, got the crate into position, and sent a silent plea to her God, asking him for his help and the strength she needed to do this. She shoved as hard as she could. It was working. She moved the oak rack higher than ever before. With extreme precision, she held the rack with one hand and slammed the crate into a space just barely big enough for it to fit with the other. She did it. There it was, right next to her shoulders. A huge load had been lifted off her chest, but Erica could still not breathe easily. The incredible weight of the oak rack was only being held by one tiny milk crate. The crate began to bend under the heavy load. A wash of anticipation and adrenaline took control of her emotions. Even though her legs were still pinned, she was going to be free soon. The next step was not nearly as critical, but all the more physically straining. She had devised a process of pushing up enough on the rack so she could keep sliding the crate farther and farther towards her legs. Then, the crate, straining and bending under the pressure, finally reached the middle of the rack. Working the rack like a teeter-totter, she rocked it back so it rested on her chest and slowly bent her stiffened legs up towards her. She was amazed her left leg moved, and more importantly, this meant that despite the throbbing pain emanating from it, the bone was not broken. After her legs were curled into her abdomen, she began to rock the rack back to where her legs had been. Free from the restraint, she wormed her way out. By the end of chapter 1, Erica breaks free from this wine rack cage, this thing that has fallen on her and making it very hard for her to get out, to assess her situation, see how injured she is, and stuff like that. So as a supplemental video to this chapter, I did an interview with Lisa Bedford, and she's the survival mom, and we did a piece on earthquakes. So be sure to go over and check out the YouTube page and find that supplemental video on earthquake survival with Lisa Bedford, the survival mom. Until next time, remember, dream, survive, and thrive.
Thank you for joining Sarah for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster at www.author.sarahfhathaway.com. If you love this podcast, please head over to iTunes and let everyone know by leaving a review.